moment. All righty. We are going to admit everybody and we're going to get this show on the road. Again, thank you all for joining. And here we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Reagan Patterson. I am one of the co-founders of Black and Environment. We are going to wait just a second to let people in before we get started. Hello, thank you to all of you who are joining. My name is Dr. Reagan Patterson. I'm one of the co-founders of Black and Environment, and we are just going to give it one more minute just to get or to allow for folks to join in. All right. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your night, particularly this night, to join us for a conversation among leading Black environmentalists globally. My name is Dr. Reagan Patterson. I'm one of the co-founders of Black and Environment. And I was not originally going to show up or show my face in this. I like to work behind the scenes. But tonight being the night that it is, we felt that it was very important to take a moment of collective breath. And this collective breath is one of relief and of acknowledgement of George Floyd's cry out. And really connecting this because we are here since we do believe in creating a sustainable world for humans and non-humans alike. And so really just wanting to take a moment for us to breathe. And so if everyone will collectively get ready to inhale, 1, 2, 3, inhale. And now breathe out. Thank you for taking that moment with me. And I will now turn it over to one of our moderators, Davisha James.
All right, thank you for leading us in that, Reagan. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first event, our first panel for Black and Environment Week. We are very, very excited to have you all here with us, and we are very excited to welcome our amazing panelists and hear what they have to say this evening. So before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability, and Bivouac Apparel in Ann Arbor. If you mention Black and Environment Week in store or online, 20% of the purchase will be donated to Black and Environment, which we will use to support the rest of our events throughout this week. So I'm just going to quickly get into the bios of our panelists. So starting with Dr. Asmeret Asefaw Berhe, a professor of soil biogeochemistry and Falasco Chair in Earth Sciences at the Department of Life and Environmental Sciences at the University of California, Merced. She is also currently serving as the Interim Associate Dean for the Graduate Division at the school. Her research interest lies at the intersection of soil science, global change science, and political ecology, and seeks to improve our understanding of how the soil system regulates the Earth's climate and the dynamic two-way relationship between soil and human communities. Among many awards and honors, Dr. Berhe received the National Science Foundation's Career Award and is a member of the inaugural class of the U.S. National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine's New Voices. She's also a recipient of the Bromery Award and a Fellow of the Geological Society of America. She is driven to ensure that scientific education and careers are equally accessible to people from all walks of life, and that academic workplaces are free from bias and harassment. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Berhe. Next, we have Dr. Suzanne Pierre, a microbial ecologist and biogeochemist, founder and lead investigator in the Critical Ecology Lab, and a writer asking how human ideologies shape the natural world. The Critical Ecology Lab explores the effects of social systems on the natural environment while celebrating and affirming scientists of marginalized backgrounds. Her research focuses on global environmental change, and she's passionate about how climate, physiology, and plant microbe interactions set the stage for elemental cycling on Earth, and uses an interdisciplinary suite of tools from microbial ecology, stable isotope mass spectrometry, and plant ecophysiology to address these questions. Dr. Pierre was awarded a 2021 OSHA Fellowship from the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco and the UC Berkeley President's Postdoctoral Fellowship in 2018. She earned her Bachelor's of Arts in 2013 from the Department of Environmental Studies at New York University and a PhD in 2018 from the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at Cornell University. So welcome to you, Dr. Pierre. Next is Dr. David Pellow, the Delson Chair, Professor of Environmental Studies and Director of Global Environmental Justice Project at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he teaches courses on social change movements, environmental justice, human-animal conflicts, sustainability, and social inequality. He has published a number of works on environmental justice issues in communities of color in the US and globally. His recent books include What is Critical Environmental Justice? Keywords for Environmental Studies, and Total Liberation, The Power and Promise of Animal Rights, and the Radical Earth Movement. He has consulted for and served on the boards of directors of several community-based, national, and international organizations that are dedicated to improving the living and working environments for people of color, immigrants, indigenous peoples, and working class communities. This includes the Global Action Research Center, Center for Urban Transformation, Greenpeace USA, Community Environmental Council, and Prison Ecology Project. He earned his Bachelor of Arts in Sociology and Religious Studies at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and his Master's of Arts and PhD in Sociology from Northwestern University. We also have Arica Hill joining us this evening. Arica is an Antiguan environmentalist, presently serving as the Executive Director of the Environmental Awareness Group in her home country. She's a recipient of an Australian Leadership Award and holds a master's degree in environmental management with a focus on sustainable development, which she received from Bond University in Australia. In 2015, she went on to complete a fellowship at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. During that time, she worked specifically on youth-related issues, particularly in the context of education and training. Though Arica has been working in the environmental field for more than a decade, one of her most recent successes was implementing a plastic bag ban in Antigua and Barbuda during her time as the Environmental Education Officer for the Department of Antigua and Barbuda. She's constantly seeking new opportunities to share the concepts of environmental conservation and preservation with a wider audience through interaction and experiential learning. She believes strongly that real change comes through communication and desires to not just see the sustainable use of natural resources, but an appreciation for them as well. So thank you for joining us, Ms. Hill. Freweyni Asress is an Ethiopian organizer, facilitator, and content creator behind the social media platform Zero Waste Habesha, currently rooted in Washington, D.C. Zero Waste Habesha, named so in homage to her Ethiopian roots, is a multimedia project focused on the Black environmental justice movement. Her work is rooted in abolition, decolonization, anti-imperialism, and Black feminism. Additionally, she shares tips and products that help her live a more sustainable lifestyle. She says that she started doing low waste for similar reasons as many others who were in that mainstream culture. Those are to reduce her impact, but her intentions evolved as she learned more about environmental racism, environmental justice, indigeneity, and eco movements in Ethiopia. Ms. Asress has featured in numerous publications and in 2020 was highlighted in an article titled 10 Black Women in the Green Space Who You'll Want in Your Instagram Feed. Kerene Taylor is a social justice advocate who has worked tirelessly in the areas of environmental justice, civil rights, and voter protections. Before returning to We Act for Environmental Justice, she was the policy director for Green for All. She's focused on ensuring that communities of color lead and speak for themselves as we address the important challenge of climate change. To that end, she believes it is imperative that people of color and women have access to economic opportunities in the clean energy sector. In 2019, she was chosen for the GRIST 50, an annual list of emerging leaders from across the US who are working on fresh, real-world solutions for our world's biggest challenges. In 2020, she was the recipient of the Rachel's Network Catalyst Award for women leaders of color in the environmental sector. So those are our panelists. As you can hear, their bios are stacked and I'm ready to hand the floor over to them so they can tell you more about what they do and what they're passionate about. So our first question is something that we're asking to everyone that we speak with this week is, what does being an environmentalist mean to you? So I see that Kerene is already unmuted, so if you'd like to go ahead.
When I think about how I care about the environment, it's really because I care about Black people. It really, you know, I sometimes in the broader scope of the environment, it's associated with birds or the forest or, you know, saving the polar bears, very, you know, picturesque things that I think the majority white community has focused on. But I literally think about the clean air and clean water that we all should have a right to. I see environmental work from more of a social justice perspective, particularly since I was a political science major in school. I'm a lawyer. So I see this more about, you know, a direct connection to the civil rights movement and also how capitalism has worked in our communities and has harmed us. So that's how I see being an environmentalist, particularly from the lens of social justice and improving our communities that have systemically been the most polluted.
Yeah, I can add to that. I think I agree exactly with what Kerene said. When I think of myself as an environmentalist, I also think of not just the natural environment, but as human beings, as being, you know, people who are affecting the environment, but also affected in a critical way by environment, and that these interactions between people and environment don't take place in a vacuum. They take place within a very complex sociopolitical and economic system that actually benefits some segment of the society, but continues to harm or even ignore the pleas and concerns of another segment of society. So I always like to remind myself that, you know, I study soil, a living, thriving community, but not necessarily human. But I like to keep a broader perspective that even though we're all just temporarily not soil, as soil scientists like to say, it's still really important to keep in mind the dynamic two-way relationship between human communities and soils and how we continue to function in this interrelated world.
Hi, everybody. I think I'll jump in now. Coming from a small Caribbean island, it's being an environmentalist is really about being Antiguan. There's no disconnection between me and the sea and grass and, you know, all the different things that make up our natural environment. So it's not, for me, it's not a choice. It's, if you're from the Caribbean, you better be an environmentalist. And I'm hoping that there'll be a generation of people who come behind me who also feel that way, and it's not separated from who they are.
Yeah, to me, being an environmentalist is like a call to action for really meaningful care work. It's, as Cabral says, returning to the source. It's being anti-imperialist. It's being decolonial in your praxis and your theory. It's abolition. It's a call to divest from all systems and institutions that that perpetually put us in this cycle of violence, where we're constantly resisting against historical trauma, interpersonal trauma, trauma at every angle. And just like abolition, it's not just tearing down things, but also imagining and building new worlds, worlds where there is no harm or violence, not only on non-human things and beings, but also on humans. It's Pan-African, it's liberatory, it's pleasurable, and yeah, it's beautiful. And it's indigenous, and not just like non-Black indigenous, but it's Black indigenous too.
Here, here. Yeah, if I could jump in on that, I want to lift up everything that has been said so far. Could not agree more with everything that's been said. I would say for me, being an environmentalist means ensuring justice for all people, for all beings and things, but it is also, for me, an understanding that we need democracy in the deepest and broadest sense, and that we need equity to ensure thriving habitats and ecosystems. Democracy is actually good for the environment. Racial justice is good for the environment. And so regarding this particular moment, this evening, where we are remembering the legacy and the memory and the life of George Floyd, if you are a racial justice activist anywhere on earth, you are also an environmentalist. Those two things cannot be disentangled. And so it means for me as well, it means connections to all people, but particularly people who have been marginalized by these systems we are dealing with, people who are rooted in land-based traditions. And so that we need justice for these communities in order to assure that everyone enjoys a healthy environment. So that's what being an environmentalist means to me.
Yeah, I think, I might be the last person to go. Thank you for all of those comments, and I can't really do a better job of integrating all of what you said, all of you, but I'll add that I've never actually considered myself an environmentalist until perhaps this evening, and I've never described myself that way, and the reason is that what I do is study the environment, and I do that because it's important to understand how the world works. How materially the world works. But I don't separate that study of the environment from the way in which people have shaped it. I don't think that they're separate. I think that if I am to study the soil and the bacteria that live in the soil, I'm actually studying what we've done to the soil bacteria themselves, and the way that our actions, our decisions, our ideologies, our power dynamics make the world work in a particular way. And I just happen to use the tools of Western science to do that. It's not that I advocate for the environment as a standalone being, but rather that we are sort of part of this field of actions, and those actions iterate over the environment. And so this is just one way of better understanding ourselves. So that's what I consider my environmentalism to be.
Wow, I I love these responses. Again, I am just so happy to be here this evening and to be in the presence of everyone sharing these amazing perspectives. Before we go any further, I'd like to shout out my co-moderator, Dr. Fisher Hoover. She just came over from the Twitter chat, and she will be helping with the questions and questions from the audience and moderating. So her video is pinned now. And now we have a specific question for Dr. Berhe. As mentioned in your bio, you were recently invited to join the inaugural class of the US National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine's New Voices. What does this tell you about the future of Black scientists, if anything?
I think as I answer that question, I should say first that Black scientists have always been part of science, right? Black excellence has always come through, and it has always shined across the world throughout time. But I think the reason why we're talking about it today and the reason why we're having this Black in conversation, obviously stemming from what happened last year, is because accomplishments of Black scholars in particular, Black and Indigenous and other people of color, but I think there's a particular segment of anti-Black kind of sentiments that have permeated in the academy over time that had continued to ignore accomplishments, structurally ignore accomplishments of Black scientists, minimize presence, efforts of work that Black scientists had done in the academy. And so I think first, I want to acknowledge that it's not that we weren't here. It's not that Black scientists weren't doing great work. It's just they were ignored and not given the same recognition. Coming to the National Academy, so I'm a member of the inaugural class of the New Voices program at the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine in the US. And for those of you who might be aware, across the world, many countries have a program called the Young Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, or something along those lines. That's because typically when you're invited to be a member of the National Academy in any one of those categories, science, engineering, or medicine, this honor comes at the end of your career. This is an honor that we bestow in the US for people who have retired or who are getting ready to retire, and it's a lifetime achievement kind of honor. But many countries around the world have recognized that that honor comes way too late for many people, and it actually could have catalyzed a lot of really good work if it came earlier in people's careers. So they started efforts that are typically known as the Young Academies to recognize people, so people who are doing good in their careers early on. The US doesn't have a Young Academy, but this New Voices was meant to be basically our version of the Young Academy. And the New Voices program was created a few years ago now then to engage people from very diverse groups, focusing on what they call at the time outstanding early career scholars across science, engineering, and medicine, so that we recognize the leadership that those fairly earlier career folks actually can bring into the fold, to bring new perspectives and communicate how and why science should be done in a different way. And so we've been involved in many activities that are designed to expand the reach of the academies and the things that the National Academies typically focus on, bring in diverse perspectives, and just a slightly different flavor that comes with being a little younger than most of the folks that are inducted into the academy typically. And I think that program at the National Academies and many other programs have shown that when you do give people from minoritized communities opportunity to actually pursue their passion, I think it works great. And I think when it comes to environmental science, I should say that many studies at this point have shown that people of color, people from minoritized communities in general, come to environmental sciences for a slightly different motivation than members of the majority. We don't necessarily pursue these careers because we're fascinated by the natural world, even though we are, right? There's a lot added to that. We are fascinated by the natural world. We're intrigued by the science. We are motivated to push the frontiers of the science, but we also care about the people and the communities that play intricate roles here. So and this is particularly true for the younger generation. I don't necessarily call myself early career at this point. I think all that this white hair betrays, saying that, but the younger generation in general, I think, brings a mix of recognition for not just the science, but also the societal aspects of the science into the mix. And that's what we hope to bring to the National Academies too. our cohort has ended right now. In fact, they just finished recruiting or finishing recruiting the second cohort, but would always be part of the New Voices community, is what that means. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Berhe. So another general question for all the panelists. Can you tell us briefly what brought you to the environmental work that you're doing now? Was it a mentor, a personal experience? Was it revealed to you in a dream? How did you get to this point?
I'll go first. There's two things. And I also want to just shout out Asmeret for referring to us as minoritized. I really dislike it when people of color are referred to as minorities, because we're not, particularly when we look at the global numbers of us. But to have that ED at the end and make it an action implying that, this has been done to us and we're categorized that way, I really appreciate that. So I just want to say that. Particularly my view of environmental work and why I wanted to get into it. There's two things. One, I like to run, or I like to go for really long walks. And you can see so much about how a city or state or whatever treats a community by how that environment looks. And you could run 2 miles or something, really intangible, and see marked changes in how our communities are. It's particularly, I live in Washington, D.C., and I live in Southeast, which is where the majority of the Black people live, and the working class Black people live across the bridge. And our communities are very different than what you're going to see in Capitol Hill or what you're going to see in Northwest or DuPont. And so that treatment of us made me really curious about why are our environments that way. And then another instance, in law school, I had attended a workshop about farm worker issues, and the women that were impacted by all the pesticides because they were working in the fields, picking strawberries and a whole host of things in Florida, were always women of color. And then all of the lawyers that were defending them or providing legal services were white men. And I was like, well, where are the Black people? Where are the Black lawyers? Where are the Black environmental lawyers? And there are tons of them out there. But of course, in comparison to the majority of people who populate the environmental science and environmental law and all those kinds of fields, it is predominantly white. And so I just saw an opportunity to learn about something and speak up for those voices that, may not have received the same treatment because of race, or the attorney may have lacked some cultural competency. So those are the two things that inspired me.
Okay, well, I'll go next. So in my early youth, I studied tourism, and I was very keen about, sharing my island with all of these other people. And while in a random tourism class, I just kind of felt like, well, why am I just sharing this story about my environment? Why am I not at the forefront of taking care of it? But at any rate, that did not necessarily catalyze me into the environmental field. I still stayed in tourism for a little while, but I got tired of it because I realized that, especially in the Caribbean, we preserve the environment for everyone else. We don't do it for us. We we want clean beaches because we want people to come and swim in it. We make sure that, so everything about our existence is not for our own enjoyment. And I thought that was messed up. I think for me, it's more about, I, as an Antiguan, need to enjoy it. I need to experience it. And the more I worked in the field, I realized that the reason why many Antiguans and maybe people in the Caribbean don't necessarily get into environmentalism, it's because despite the fact that we live in it and it's like right next to us, in front of us, we don't experience it. So if we would see it, if we would touch it, if we would be a part of it, we'd fall in love. And that's kind of what pushed me into this field completely.
Erica, I just want to say that that resonated so deeply. I felt that so, yeah, it's such a personal level. And I'm from Ethiopia, and again, like I think this is true for like most of the global South, is that our lands are just for tourism. It's for other people to enjoy. And there's so much exploitation of our land, of our farmers, and there, even our people become like tourist destinations. I could go on forever about how the Ethiopian government literally uses people and land to make millions of dollars, but doesn't actually support any of like farmers' demands for resources or to even have land ownership or anything. For me, I think like what calls me into this work is that like I want to be free, and I want my people to be free. I want all oppressed people and non-humans to be free. And I think that when that is the thing that keeps me grounded in this work, that's the thing that keeps me principled in this work. And that's what I often, that's often what I carry with me when, I mean, the thing is like, there's so much violence even being in this work. And it can be so discouraging. And I think that's the thing that, yeah, again, that I'm rooted in, is liberation for all living things. Yeah.
Well, I guess I could go. In terms of what brought me to this work, I would say definitely mentors, broadly speaking, starting with my parents, who were both deeply involved in the civil rights movement in the United States and the South. They were both involved in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and worked closely with great folks like the late, great John Lewis. And they also became university scholars. So they really instilled in me a passion for justice and a passion for learning and teaching. I'll also say, growing up in the South, I was one of these Black kids who just, I guess I didn't get the memo. I was out jumping in water holes, I was fishing, I was hiking, I was camping. I didn't give a damn if I was the only non-white person out there. I was going to do it. We're going to have fun. I'm jumping off cliffs, into rivers, in the Great Smoky Mountains. White folks are like looking at me like I'm crazy. I'm looking at them like they're crazy. I didn't give an F. I'm doing it. And that's because, my dad, he just pushed me out there. But there was one time, I will say, when we drove up to a lake, Percy Priest Lake in Nashville, Tennessee. And I opened up the glove compartment for some reason, and there was a gleaming metal object in that glove compartment. And I was sure this was not a toy. It was definitely a deadly weapon. And I asked my father what was going on. He says, look out the window, look at the people on the beach. What do you see? Look in the mirror. Who do you see and what do you see? And then he broke down a lot of the history of the mass and mob violence against our people when we were doing nothing more outrageous than trying to recreate and have a good time. And I was like, damn, you just ruined my Saturday morning. I just want to go back home. But that set me off, on a path of wanting to learn more and wanting to share those lessons. A couple of other mentors. When I first started grad school, first week of grad school, I met Dr. Robert Bullard, who we may know has been described as the father of environmental justice studies and the father of the environmental justice movement. He's been a mentor and a colleague and friend of mine ever since that day in September of 1992. And of course, the great Hazel Johnson, the Black mother of the environmental movement, who for many, many years led the amazing organization, People for Community Recovery. She gave me my first job in an environmental justice organization and allowed me to work there and knew the whole time that I was gathering data for my dissertation. So, and I guess lastly, I would say Alan Schneeberg, who was my dissertation advisor, took a chance on me And yeah, so I want to just say thanks to all those mentors.
I'm a biogeochemist and ecologist. That's like the technical work that I do. And I say that because I think it's important to kind of start from like where I am and like, you know, follow the breadcrumbs back a little bit. And when I do that, I think about how, as an undergraduate, I was thinking a lot about my heritage and the way that, first of all, I was not like a science person. So there's this first level of like my entire experience of what I was allowed to know about and study was racialized and gendered early on. And I think like we acknowledge that, like, you know, there's not enough Black people in the environment. That's part of why we are gathering here today. But when I think back to that, like the visceral experience of like fear around measurement and knowing, there was something really important about and like liberatory about deciding to do the thing that I was sort of conditioned to believe was not for me. And kind of at the same time with that, I'm Haitian, I'm of Haitian descent. And there are these stories around what Haiti is and what Haitians have done to their land. And I get a little bit emotional thinking about it because I was so frustrated with this, the narratives I think that are created around the global South and how Black and brown people handle the natural world, when in fact there's this this is like an effort in world building itself, you know, to sort of make us forget that what was done to our lands. And so this particular story about deforestation in Haiti was really important to me. And how do you get to the bottom of that story? How do you retell that story with you know, evidence that is unimpeachable? You become the expert, and it was very terrifying to decide to do that. But my love of nature and as Dr. Pellow was just saying, being, you know, a kid who really didn't like that much other than going outside, it was sort of this confluence of like, how can I sort of reappropriate the master's tools in some way to start to recreate these narratives using empirical evidence. So that's part of why I do what I do.
Yeah, those are credible stories. I have to say I came to the study of soils only because I discovered that people actually studied the science of soil in college when I first got to college, and this was in Eritrea. And it's important to kind of give you a little bit of context that I was born and raised in Eritrea at the time where there was an active, ongoing armed struggle for independence. And so my entire life milestones are marked by wars and armed conflicts and you know, political instability. So I grew up in an environment where you're told not to wander around. You just do not wander around where you don't know the place is safe, because there are wars, there are abductions, that people disappear, there are landmines, there are bombings, there's all sorts of stuff around you because there's an active, you know, armed conflict going on not that far from where we live, even though I was born and raised in the capital city, but still there was a lot of political instability. So, but I grew up in a home where my parents emphasized learning. School was really important to them. Both my parents were first generation everything. Neither of their parents even went up, you know, anything higher than fourth grade education, but they both literally, you know, supported their families and worked since they were teenagers and went to college, supported each other to finish college and law school for my dad, and then eventually became a professor at the university. And so to them, education was this thing that even as you grow up in an armed struggle, this was the thing that we cannot, you know, kind of forget to excel in, because as they spoke about it, education was the most important wealth that we could inherit from them. That's what they could do for us. So they filled our house with you know, with books from everywhere you can imagine, everything from things about environmental to science to Marxism, Leninism, and everything in between. The house was full of books. We were encouraged to read and rewarded for reading and excelling in school and all of these things. So when I went to college, I was a good student in high school and all, but I thought I was going to do chemistry as pre-med. And then I found out that there was this department called Soil and Water Conservation, and they actually studied soils. But I get to use all the science that I love, and I get to learn about this new environment that I never really thought about. I mean, I took soil for granted like most people at that time. But I started learning in an intro to soil science course, and I literally just could not stop learning about this. It's fascinating, just an incredible world that I didn't even know existed beneath my feet. I think in many ways it opened a new world for me, right? And so I kept expanding and learning and learning. And I was fortunate enough that my parents were very supportive when I said I was going to, pick this topic, wandered from going, I'm going to be a doctor, to all of a sudden, it's like, I'm going to be a soil scientist. I'm going to learn soils. But they were like, as long as you do it well, doesn't really matter, just pursue your passion. And I was fortunate, right? At the time, most people don't have that luxury, and they were just supportive of me to pursue this, and till this day, super supportive. But then as I was nearing the end of my undergrad, though, there was another pivotal moment, because we kept learning a lot about soil science and soil and water conservation, but I felt like I never learned enough about the social aspect of it. And so that's when I decided, if I'm going to pursue higher education, I'm going to take a little bit of a detour, and decided to do a master's in political ecology. And for those of you who might not be aware, political ecology is this study of relationships between the environment and environmental issues and how we address environmental change, but with an explicit focus on the political, economic, and social factors that cause change. And that was just another eye-opening experience. And I think it set me up on a path of not just loving and focusing the science, but also trying to situate it in a larger context.
All right, thank you everyone for sharing those stories. I really love how different everyone's origin stories were, but at the same time, how similar they were. Like, there are so many links between each one. I think that's really amazing. So now we have a question specifically for Dr. Pellow. You've called yourself a practical anarchist. Can you elaborate on how you define that term and how it nestles into your environmental justice work?
Sure, thank you for the question. Before I answer that question, I just want to say this group of people is on fire. I am just blown away.
Right?
And just unbelievable. It's ridiculous that I'm even a part of this conversation. So I really, I'm honored for this opportunity. And also just want to say, folks, a lot of love coming down in the chat. We've got an incredible audience. So thank you all for being here. Pragmatic or practical anarchist. Yes, let me start though by defining what I would call anarchism. And for me, anarchism is fundamentally about ensuring that our basic needs are met and that we can thrive in our communities through collective decision-making, through deep forms of democracy and uplifting equality and justice. So for me, anarchism isn't just about abolishing the state so much as it is about lifting up good things, making sure that we have everything in our power to meet our needs without relying exclusively on a fundamentally authoritarian, violent, coercive, ecocidal, and misogynist and racist apparatus. And that's just for starters as to how I would describe what the state is. There is a long history of anarchism in African diasporic communities, in the Americas for sure, maroon communities who ran away from rather than toward white empire. Black cooperatives, which pooled and continue to pool resources to build power and sustenance and create resiliency. An organization and a movement called MOVE, still around today, which is explicitly anti-statist, anti-capitalist in its organizing, and so much more. Mutual aid societies that formed out of necessity and out of a recognition that this racist state was not going to give us anything. And so having said all of that, I am a practical or pragmatic anarchist in the sense that I don't want to be a fundamentalist. Like, I could change my view on this tomorrow if I am provided evidence that maybe it's a wrong-headed idea, right? Because I'm always learning. But as long as we have a state, I'm willing to work through it because I'm an every tool in the toolkit kind of person. So I've worked on successful and I would say high impact corporate campaigns with groups like the Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition, Greenpeace, and other groups that target and force companies like Newmont Mining Corporation, the Dell Computer Corporation, Hewlett Packard, Compaq, IBM, and so many others, making sure that they are doing right by their workers, by the frontline communities, and by the ecosystems that they impact, without worrying about whether governments are regulating those companies or not, because guess what? Newsflash, they're not. But I also work on the pragmatic side, state-centered campaigns, government-centered campaigns. Like right now, I'm working on a Green New Deal for my region of the Central Coast of California. I also support court cases. I've testified in court cases, focusing on suing and combating governments and companies to make sure that we keep oil in the ground and to promote environmental justice and climate justice. Let me end by just saying, let's talk about anarchism in the light of what just happened with the Derek Chauvin verdict around Brother George Floyd. Justice, as many folks have said tonight, really, is this justice? I mean, justice might look like, hey, maybe George Floyd would still be alive today. Maybe that would be justice. Justice for me would look like addressing racism at its core and not relying on the state to give it to us. I mean, the fact that there was even a debate about whether George Floyd was murdered versus whether he caused his own death somehow magically. The fact that we were all holding our breaths, the fact that schools closed down in Minneapolis, where I lived for 7 years, and the fact that the National Guard was called out reveals that we rely on the state to dictate and to determine our humanity as Black people, and that's not okay. Lastly, and I will make no friends when I say this, locking up anyone, even a racist, murdering cop like Derek Chauvin, is a bad idea because it reinforces this system that fundamentally is set up to oppress the hell out of us Black folks everywhere. So that's what being a pragmatic anarchist means.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for all of that. That was a word. I wish we had all night to stay here and talk with you all, but I'm going to hand off to Future right now as we kind of combine some questions so that we can be mindful and respectful of everyone's time and get y'all out of here at the time that we promised.
Oh, yeah, I feel like we all need a minute to just kind of sit with all of that. Yeah, so grateful that you all are here with us tonight and to everyone tuning in. So I think this next question actually ties in really well to what you're talking about in terms of, justice in the systems that we see. And so I think, particularly as Black folk, we're working in spaces of environmentalism, of activism, organizing, research, right? Often these things go hand in hand for a lot of us. And so with so many environmental organizations that on one hand being predominantly white or led by mostly white leadership, one of my questions for you is, how do you, or if you think the sudden awareness of police brutality that's kind of permeated particularly non-Black communities globally, if that's helped push your work within your organization or within your research forward, and particularly for those in the academy, how or if that's helped push against the narrative of being an objective researcher, right? And so I'd really love to hear both from Ms. Hill, like as women who are in organizations and really kind of doing more of the activism work and the organizing work. How has this helped? Maybe it hasn't, but I'd really, really love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, so it's an interesting question for, I think, someone in the Caribbean, because we are predominantly Black. And it's interesting too for my organization, which has been, while it's got a mix of expats, which is really migrants, and local Antiguans, It's more for me, it has been, in the past few years, I have been pushing for my organization to amplify voices of Black people. And it's not so much that I don't see the benefits of what has come by working alongside white people. I think, especially in my organization, it has been very fruitful for us to have gotten some of that hand holding, especially in conservation, where we didn't have the skills and these people came and they were like, yeah, we're willing to give you those skills. But at this point, and at this point in history for me, I was like, we have to be the owners of those skills. And I remember saying to my team at the beginning of this year, especially in lockdown, I said, well, we're everything that we're doing it inside. If we want to learn how to do something new, we are learning how to do it so that we can train others. We are the ones who are going to hold that knowledge and not just have it for ourselves, but now we have to go to other civil society organizations and share it with them so they can do it too. And so that the voices of Black people across my country could be as loud and as not abrasive, but as loud as possible, because very often you hear that nobody's doing anything, and it's always this group of people who come in and they kind of, we know the white savior complexes that sometimes kind of permeate society. But I wanted to let them know, hey, we don't need that, we're good, because we have the skills right here, we can do it ourselves. So I don't know if specifically the whole situation with George Floyd would have really changed our way of thinking, but it's more of recognizing that it's time for us to be in front, and for us to not just be in front, but to stay in front. So that's where we are.
I would say for my work at We Act for Environmental Justice that COVID and the forcing of us to have nothing to do but to watch TV. And so seeing, unfortunately, the murder of George Floyd on television repeatedly, also all of the other incidents of Black lives literally being stolen from us, and having that hyper focus on COVID and these issues at the same time, definitely led to, and it may not have always been genuine, frankly, but an acknowledgement by the broader mainstream environmental movement and white people to say that they would like to do more work around justice. So there was a direct correlation in terms of, I would say, donations to our organization shot up during this time period. The number of statements from green groups, from energy companies saying that they are going to commit to more equitable sharing of resources and investing in people of color projects, things like that, shot up tremendously. And I think, but at the same time, during this year, we also saw Jeff Bezos and Amazon give millions of dollars to the same organizations and very little direct money to Black and Latino and people of color-led groups. So in the deed to follow up these statements we're still trying to see it. But in terms of the awareness that maybe your organization has a real problem with the retention of Black people because you have a problem with Black people, yes, there were really clear examples of that. I fortunately work for a people of color led organization, so that may not be my day-to-day, but how we were treated and the number of organizations that all of a sudden were saying, Black Lives Matter and we want to work with you. Yes, there was a direct correlation between that and the murder of George Floyd and the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you. I was wondering, Ms. Asress, did you also see a change or response in terms of your work with the Zero Waste platform, or kind of conversely, how have you been able to use your platform as a tool for freedom and liberation?
Yeah, well, first I want to just share, I think for me, like one of the biggest limitations within environmental justice is that I think a lot of environmental justice organizing is still moving from a place of centering whiteness. How do we show white people that we exist in the environment, that we study science, that we care about the planet? How do we get a seat at the table? How do we, or even how do we reconcile the violences that white people bring to our life, to our work, etc. And there's so many reasons why that is, I think, harmful for our movements. One being that we don't actually get to then address the harm that we are also bringing to these movements. Like, for example, I think like environmental justice, like a lot of my Black comrades within, like leftist comrades within EJ, we talk a lot about how like it's still a very cishet Black male dominated field and organizing space. It's still there's so much colorism within environmental justice. We still see a lot of light-skinned people and white passing people really dominating the space. It's still very US centered. It's like, and in that way, it's also romanticizing Africa as this place that's Black and indigenous and inherently revolutionary and radical, but is also not contending to actually like real problems and green colonialism and all the violences that are happening there. And yeah, I mean, there's so much patriarchal violence. There's so much transphobia. There's so much fatphobia. There's all these problems that exist in the world also exist in these movement spaces because we're still centering whiteness. And I wonder where we could be and how more meaningful our conversations could be when we're addressing the harms that we're bringing into these spaces, and how we can start building building movements that are addressing colorism and patriarchal violence. I think for me, I think it's really hard for organizers when there is a murder or a televised murder, because there's so many people who flood your emails and your DMs and like, I want to get involved, but it's not really solidarity. It's responding to something. You see the people who sign up for the emails who are excited and think organizing is exciting and romanticize organizing. They don't show up to your meetings after like 2 months. You don't hear from them. You get these donations, like people will send you like thousands of dollars, but they're not actually interested in building with you. They're not actually interested in being community with you. They're not actually interested in solidarity. And organizing is long-term. It's exhausting. It's isolating. It's not being out in the streets. So much of it is very behind the scenes work. It's, I mean, I'm sure all of y'all have done organizing, so you know that like a lot of it is tedious. And it's not these big exciting moments that we see. And also, why is that even exciting? There's nothing exciting about fighting for your life or advocating for the liberation of your people. And so in that way, it's so exhausting. I dread it so much. Even I think like Black History Month or Earth Day or Earth Month, when you get a ton of white people who are suddenly interested in the work that you're doing, and also create their own hierarchy of like experts, Black experts in the field. And we see the same people on rotation going to all these speaking gigs saying the same thing. So yeah, it's really limiting, it's exhausting. But in regards to George Floyd, I think that like, for me, it deepened my praxis in that like, we can't call for Black, and also I don't personally use the word environmental justice really that much anymore. I prefer to talk about Black ecology, because I think Black ecology has a lot more leftist, is a lot more rooted in leftist principles and theory, and anarchism and communism, and is inherently anti-imperialist, where environmental justice, I think, is very policy focused and is still legitimizing the state, is still legitimizing the settler state. Because if we're trying to like do all the, it's very like reform. I think environmental justice feels reform and Black ecology feels abolitionist. We don't want to legitimize the state. And we're also finding different ways to connect. So how can Black ecology movement work in, here unoccupied in the center of US colonial empire? How can we connect those struggles for Black ecology with Palestinian liberation struggles, and see that that is also a Black ecology issue, and that is also Black ecology work. Yeah, so it just deepened my belief that Black ecology, abolition and Black ecology, abolition and Black ecology are so inherently intertwined. Whether that we're talking about freeing all political prisoners who have been who have experienced carceral violence and harm for protecting land, water, and also just freeing all prisoners in general. To seeing that, like during George Floyd, like, you know, we saw heightened militarization, and we know that U.S. military is the biggest polluter, and we know carceral state is a huge polluter. And we know that carceral state also provides, creates a food justice or food apartheid when we study the food that Black prisoners are eating. And yeah, anyways, I could go on forever, but I hope I answered your question.
No,
Basically, abolition now.
I mean, I think, you know, you've all brought up so many good points, right? In terms of thinking about the intersection and the intersectionality of these multiple spaces of Black ecologies and, you know, disability and just kind of US dominance in terms of a lot of the environmental movements, you know, and how that looks different when you're in a majority Black country versus a majority white country. You know, and so we've got one large question yet before we go into Q&A from the audience, but I did want to bring up Dr. Pierre, your new nonprofit, or well, actually, I don't know if it's new or not, but Critical Ecology Lab, and in particular, the work that you're doing to really explore these intersections, right? Bringing in Black feminism and theory and Black ecology, and thinking about how to do that, you know, from a nonprofit point of view, not just research. And so I would love it if you could share a little bit about, you know, how that's going, how that process is going, what that process has looked like for you in terms of trying to bring all of these things together, and how that's influenced by your roots as a Haitian woman. And then we'll transition into the final question.
Thank you so much for just giving me a moment to talk about the Critical Ecology Lab and like what is it that you're talking about? So so most of you know that kind of research, particularly environmental research, typically comes out of research labs that are based at a university, usually headed up by a professor and their group of graduate students or postdoctoral researchers. And so the Critical Ecology Lab is kind of a response and a departure from that structure. The purpose of the nonprofit is to kind of hybridize a traditional environmental research group with a social justice and liberation focused environmental organization. And so what we're doing is sort of taking the model of a lab, which includes a number of different researchers, but what we're focusing on is this sort of
I think we
lagging. I'm not sure.
Oh, you're back. Okay, you're back.
Okay. Sorry about that. I'm going to just turn off my video as I'm speaking, just for ease here.
Okay.
Thank you. So I guess So what I was trying to say is that what we're doing is trying to step outside of what the traditional approach to environmental and racial intersectional issues is, which I think is environmental justice or Black ecology, as Freweyni is describing really well, as kind of an alternative perspective. And what we're offering is critical ecology, which is to say an approach to doing environmental research, to studying kind of the basic science of how the ecosystem is responding to environmental change that is driven by capitalism, settler colonialism, and white supremacy. And so what we're doing is to say, if we are to we are adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, et cetera, can we do that from an explicit perspective of the real drivers of these changes, which are ideological, which are essentially what I'm describing. And we can get so much from critical theory to inform our basic hypotheses about how to go about studying the environment. So kind of to tie it to what you were asking a moment ago, Fisher, about how the heightened awareness around Black Lives Matter and basically like all of these organizations and corporations suddenly like, I really think kind of being motivated by shame and by social pressure. And I really put no stock in the wave of response that we've received from people of all backgrounds kind of expressing interest or concern with these issues now, because I kind of see that as like, I guess to use like a metaphor, what that is the surface, right? We're seeing the waves, we're seeing the choppiness of the surface of the ocean, right? And that's really not reflective of deeper mixing, which is that layer that Freweyni is talking about, which is understanding the fundamental causes and intersections of both historical processes such as global imperialism of Europe, but also the way that kind of structures what is sort of normalized as how we approach the environment here today in the contemporary environmentalist space. So right underneath that is the work that a lot of, I think, organizers and activists are doing, and where I see the Critical Ecology Lab as just being a layer of the ocean just underneath that. And what I'm describing is really that tedium that Freweyni alluded to, which I think is, I hope I'm making sense about this. There's a deeper layer of understanding that's not responding to the crisis, that's not addressing and describing what is happening to us now, but actually analyzing the fundamental nature of the supremacy as it affects the ecosystem, that as it affects the genome. I mean, I believe that these are measurable characteristics of white supremacy, and it's exhausting to think about the fact that this will take many people's careers to truly unearth. And so I guess I'm bringing that up to say, in this work, to respond to like an outpouring of interest in what we're doing is to be more susceptible to the vagaries of whiteness than I'm willing to do. And so I look at my work as sort of a practice. My cat's meowing. I'm like, shut up. I look at my work as kind of a patience practice, right? Like we have to have a longer view than our oppressors have ever been able to conceive. And I think that's what the Critical Ecology Lab is trying to do. And I'll put my video back on.
Oh, thank you for that. I really like that, the idea of a patience practice, right? Like just having the practice of patience, but consistency, and knowing that you're working towards a goal, right? That leads to liberation, that leads to community, to freedom. And so, yeah, thank you so much for that. And it's exciting for me as a researcher to also see new ways of existing within academia, or using the PhD in a different way that brings us closer to those goals and those visions. So this leads really well into the last question before we go into the audience Q&A. And I think it's an important one because we've talked about a lot of heavy things, but also a lot of, I guess, in a lot of ways, things that can be difficult to keep going. And so our last question for all of you is, what is that something that brings you joy, keeps you motivated to come back day after day and show up and keep showing up. And whether that's in your work life or personal, I leave that up to you to decide what you feel comfortable sharing. But I think we could all use a little bit of that right now. So. I can popcorn it. I know it's a big question. If you need a minute to think about it, that's okay too.
Fuchsia, do you mind reiterating it? Just because I'm like a goldfish. I'm just like, what's happening?
Yeah. So the question is, what is something about your work or in your personal life that brings you joy and keeps you motivated?
I'm happy to start. I think there's a lot going on in life that's obviously challenging, especially these days. But if I were to point out two things that bring me joy right now, in addition to my family and especially my blessings, my kids are literally both of them. Her names are Joy in my language. Other than them and my family, I think what gives me a lot of hope is how young people are involved in pushing for climate action. I think as a scientist who works in this space, it is incredible how engaged the folks who are even teenagers and sometimes younger, and definitely college students these days, and the young generation is so much more engaged, way more than we were, let's be honest, like way more than we were at their age. And that is phenomenal. I think there is a growing recognition that these are issues we can't delay. We have to act in a decisive way. And they're in many ways leading for these efforts and pushing for science, informed policy that gets us on the right course. And that I find very, very helpful.
So at last year at the start of COVID, a group of friends and I, when everything was locked down, we started a snorkeling club. And I saw your face. We started a snorkeling club and we used to just go snorkeling every week or every other week, which is like I say to people all the time, the water is my God place. It's where I think God talks to me. That's just my place. And for the past year, I have been begging my brother to come with me. He can swim, there's no problem. He can snorkel, it's not a problem, but he never comes. And on Sunday, I said to him, well, I'm going diving. And if you want to come, you can come snorkeling above me and do whatever. And he was like, okay, sure, I'll come. And he hasn't stopped talking about it since. And for me, that's what brings me joy. Being able to take this thing that I love like so much and getting somebody else who I love to come and experience that, and for it to be that pure eureka moment, that's it.
I can go. Well, first and foremost, my siblings, I'm obsessed with them. They're the cutest, most brilliant people I know, and I love them so much. And they're so sweet and so brilliant in everything they do and say, and they really keep me grounded. And then I think during this past year, I really, it's been like really difficult being so far away from my family. My whole family lives in Ethiopia. And I've been trying to figure out how do I stay connected to my roots. And again, back to Cabral's phrase of like returning to the source. And for me, that looked like reclaiming so many ceremonies that I hadn't really done myself, but had always been around me. And when I was last home, my grandmother was encouraging me. She was like, when are you going to do like Boone Una ceremony? When are you gonna do coffee ceremony? Like, when are you gonna learn? And I promised her like I would learn how to roast coffee and I would learn how to like perform coffee ceremony. And so I like got up early and I like dedicated like every day to making coffee ceremony. I had my incense, I had like popcorn, I did everything, and just played some of my favorite music, my favorite Tigrinya music, my favorite music, yeah, from all over like the Horn. And it's been so nice. And it's reminded me how much I enjoyed being by myself, and that I don't have to just do these things when I'm with other people. That I can enjoy coffee ceremony by myself, and that's beautiful. Yeah, and that's beautiful. And it's just such a like slow, like it's just like so nice and meditative. Like I've been thinking a lot more about like what other like what does archiving look like outside of like documentation. And I feel like learning different ceremonial practices that are indigenous to me and my people feel like a form of archiving. And have just been kind of daydreaming like, oh my God, what's it going to be like teaching my kids one day how to do coffee ceremony and sharing with them this experience. And I will have to say, I make such good coffee. Like my roasting is just amazing. I'm pretty proud of how far I've come.
I'd like to add that this hasn't really been the best year. The isolation that COVID had, and so many instances of, you know, frankly, for our organization, for We Act, we lost our deputy director, Cecil Corbin Mark, which was a tremendous loss to the environmental justice movement. He was a friend, a big brother, and a mentor. And so this hasn't been, this hasn't always been easy. And in general, just as people, we're always, or at least I can only speak for myself, dealing with our own issues coming into this work, dealing with imposter syndrome, like, am I making sense? All of that, goes through my head. And, I'm thankful that I do this work and I'm able to speak up for those who don't have this platform, who aren't in DC. A lot of environmental justice groups are grassroots based. And so having We Act be in DC, I think is really impactful to help other groups get access to members of Congress, get access to the EPA and a whole host of things, and using our resources to help other groups has been tremendous. And finding that balance, work-life balance is not easy. A lot of our organizations are understaffed and under-resourced. And so just doing this work, it is rewarding, but having the moment to pour back into myself has been a challenge. And, so I'm thankful for the ability to go outside and go for really long walks, or picking up boxing and beating the hell out of a boxing bag to get some of the stress out. But, it's something that I'm constantly working on, figuring out how to have the work-life balance so that I can keep doing this work. Because unfortunately, we're seeing the impact of it with people that we love and admire honestly dying. So it isn't very easy to find that balance.
Amen to that. If I could just say a few things. Few things inspire me. Groups of Black folks who are taking and creating space in places where we allegedly don't belong. So there's a group here called the Sea League. There's a group down in LA called Black Sand, both of which are doing this good work on the beaches of Santa Barbara and LA, and daring white folks to push us out, to try to push us out. So that's one thing that inspires me. Another is human labor. And yes, we can get burnt out, no doubt. Human labor has been the single most important form of energy driving the global capitalist economy, but it is also, in my view, single most important form of energy driving the global environmental and climate justice movements. And that energy is most inspiring for me when it comes through and enables the building of relationships. And that's what I've been privy to in terms of building this global family of folks doing this good work. And so it's that beautiful relationship building human labor that inspires me a great deal. And then finally, cooking. I'm gonna tell you people, lentils and rice and greens is all I need. I'm a Southern man, and you show me some collard greens in 20 minutes. I'll have that cooked up for you, and we'll be throwing down. So yeah, that's inspiring to me. And this panel is inspiring to me. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
I'll share something because who knows, my internet is being very finicky, so I don't trust it. I'm gonna turn my video off again. But yeah, one of the things that has been kind of similar to David, just cooking has been like a nice space to be in where I'm not responsible for anything except nourishing myself. And that's like not a thing anywhere else in this world. And then I guess another really nourishing space, I guess just to talk more about the Critical Ecology Lab, because I love to gush about it and the people involved, is that what we've kind of done is start to create an environment that doesn't exist anywhere else for most of the people who are involved in the lab. And that's a deliberate effort in building a world in which we make the rules, we agree upon the ways, the conduct, and the nature of our interactions. And that's centered around compassion, and that's centered around the wellness of the people who show up every time that we meet. And so what that looks like is, instead of just focusing on our productivity or our projects or how far we're getting in this, asking how we are doing as people, as researchers, but making a space in which the priority is that all of the pain that we kind of accrue in all of these other parts of the world and parts of our environment have a place to kind of be metabolized in a supportive space, and specifically in a space that understands the relationship between our work and our souls. And so I just want to shout out my collaborator, Kunal, who's on this call right now. They have been fundamental in deliberately creating a world in which our love for one another is the backdrop for all of the research that we do. So thank you, Kunal. Thank you for others who are also part of the Critical Ecology Lab who are here. And we just had a meeting this morning that literally made me cry twice in like a professional setting. And the fact that in that professional setting, crying twice was not only okay, but like welcome is the point. So thank you for building that little world with me, you all.
That was beautiful. Thank you all. Did we get everybody? Dr. Curry, did you go? Yeah, okay. All right, so with that, we've got just under 10 minutes left, and we wanted to get to an audience question as promised. And so we have a lot of great questions. It's actually pretty tough to pick, but we will go with one. We were able to combine a question from Nautica and Sarahana, and I apologize if I mispronounce either of your names. So the convergence of their question is, how do you balance passion to support minoritized, disenfranchised communities and the mission of your employer who may have different interests? How do you weigh those risks? How can someone new to this field advocate for themselves and others at the intersection of practice and ideology? And so anyone can take that question.
I'm happy to start since nobody is going. So I think there's a lot in that question, obviously, right? We are all in to start with, in this work and doing this kind of work from multiple different kind of types of organizations and sectors because of the passion that we have for this kind of work, right? And so I think first and foremost, holding on to that passion in any way that you can, not losing it in the everyday grind is super important, obviously, right? But at the same time, I think a lot of folks would say, when you ask, how did you make it this far? You know, we lean on each other, we lean on our community, we find a supportive network of folks that understand the journey, but also are willing to be there for us when we need support, and then we be there for them when they need it too. But finding that community helps you, I think, in many ways, stay sane and stay productive and stay, you know, stay true to also that passion that brought you to this kind of work in the first place. And so first and foremost, I think that's what I would talk about. And it's true, sometimes our institutions and the goals of the institutions and the structures and policies are not necessarily where we would like them to be. But most of us work within institutions that are broad enough that we could pursue the kind of things that we care about, and support the community that could use and needs our support, and be there basically for one another, especially for those who don't have necessarily as much power and privilege in the system like some of us now have with time. And that makes the grind and the hustle that we have to deal with worthwhile.
Moshe, if none of the other panelists want to contribute, we can ask a second question. All right. So the next question I want to ask is from Floor. And they asked if you all could share what sustains and how you've been able to sustain your careers, and what has supported the work or privileges that you leveraged in order to ensure that the life of your career is in the field and sustained within the field. I'll also add that to the chat. And then as the panelists are thinking, I'll just share that this is being recorded as a reminder, and so we will be posting it to our Facebook and YouTube channels, and we'll send out an announcement once that's finalized. And also, please do feel free to drop a one-word description of how you're feeling in the chat as we close.
Actually concerned, and I want to do more in this area. I know in law school, I founded the Environmental Law Society at Florida A&M. So that was, I think, one example, but that was so long ago. But I really think right now, particularly with the Biden administration's big focus on clean energy and environmental justice, that the opportunities for young people in this field and to grow in this area is tremendous. And I want to figure out how to do more, and almost to the point where it's like creating a program, or maybe, you know, helping a lot of students of color, particularly those at historically Black colleges and universities who may not have access to some of these majors or some of these disciplines, get that exposure. I'm a proud HBCU alum, and there's going to be so much money coming through this renewable energy focus, whether it's through solar or wind, and it needs to go to those schools. It needs to go to people that look like us, because we've been harmed for so long, and we've been the sacrifice zones for white communities for so long, that we need to benefit from those solutions. So that's something that I personally want to do more work around.
I don't. Oh, Sue, you can go first. No, I always want to hear what you have to say, so you go first.
Well, ironically, I don't know if this is irony. I like have more questions about the question than I have answers, because I really do feel that there are spaces that are broad enough that we can find. And let me turn off my video, because let's not play. This is not going to work. I'm sorry. I share my internet with far too many people. This is why. But I guess my questions about the question are kind of like, in the structures or institutions that exist already, that have kind of infrastructure, that have scaffolding for promotion of your work, like you kind of have to do, mutual aid is not sharing it, don't. Okay, I feel like you do have to, and I think that to my senior colleagues on this panel, you can kind of talk about the ways that you have to not literally only code switch, but code switch in terms of what it is that you do with your work and how you present and frame your work. And that like sort of contortion was not going to be compatible with the type of work that I wanted to do. So I'm still in the like figuring it out stage of where does one get resources when you aren't the university, and where does one get resources that are sustainable, that you don't have to scramble year to year, and you know that I fear that might be the case. So I think some folks are smiling because it's just like, oh yeah, we just love to scramble. Nonprofits love that. So I guess I'm just thinking about another way to sustain my work is through relationship, apart from the financial aspect. And what I'm seeing and being truly overwhelmed by is by being as sincere as I can about what I'm about and what I'm doing here. It brings so many people to me that I could have never asked for in the first place, you know, like to even expect that sort of support. I think that shows me that the model that I want to build and that I want to live in with you all is where we are decentralized from these kind of like, the metropole is giving us money to do the thing that will maybe liberate us, maybe. I'm not interested in that. So I just want to say community is the way that I sustain my work. So yeah.
Yes, Sue, that's perfect. I was going to say community as well. If y'all haven't read, I highly, highly recommend The Revolution Will Not Be Funded Beyond the Nonprofit Industrial Complex. And I think that will answer some of your questions of like what it even means to exist within these contradictions of trying to do this advocacy work, trying to do this organizing work that's deeply rooted in liberatory praxis, but also having to like think about funding and having to think about, okay, I still need to get fed. I still need to pay these bills. And yeah, it's hard. And I think it's also meeting yourself where you're at. And in that, like, I don't do the work that I'm speaking about as a career. And that has been an intentional choice because yeah, like I mean, like one, because I'm like, abolish academia. Academia is just so violent and colonial and has caused so much harm. Even though there's amazing like Black scholars who are doing incredible work, but also like Black people aren't something to study. We're like, yeah, anyways, Robin Kelly has a really great quote about this. But, and also, I want to divest from nonprofits. My full-time job, full transparency, is sexual assault advocacy work within a nonprofit. And it deeply hurts having to do that work within a nonprofit space. And I think something that I think about often is participatory trauma, and how much trauma that we experience as Black folks having to do this work within these inherently violent systems that we and institutions that we know don't want us to be free, and are and also are actively co-opting our movements and co-opting our work, co-opting our language, co-opting our theory and analysis. And I think really the only way to do this is through community care and collective care. because when we care for our communities and we make sure that our communities are cared for, we're able to care for ourselves. And lastly, I just want to share this beautiful quote by Mariam Kaba, who's like so brilliant that I can't actually think of better adjectives to use but brilliant and just stunning. She is a prison abolitionist. If you don't know her work, I highly recommend visiting Prison Culture. But one quote that I went to a workshop of hers once and someone asked a similar question, and her response was, "Hope is a discipline." And I think about that quote and I literally have it written everywhere on my my notes app on my phone, on my laptop, in my books. And it's just a good reminder for me to remember that, yeah, like hope is a discipline. And I'm committed to principled struggle with other Black folks. And also, again, back to pleasure, making sure that Black ecology and environmental justice doesn't just look like studying harm and violence that are happening to our people. We're also learning new ways to have pleasurable experiences with the land and non-human beings and each other. Like, what does pleasure look like for us as Black folks in a Black ecology framework? Yeah, we don't have to do this trauma bonding.
Okay, all right, well, I am going to start wrapping us up here, and I don't even know what to say. This has been such an amazing evening. Thank you, thank you, thank you to the panelists and to the audience. We have an amazing audience as well. They've been so engaged and they've really been going wild in the chat. They feel inspired, they feel seen, they feel held. So I think this has been a very great community event. And again, I'd like to thank the speakers for giving us their time this evening, for giving us their stories, their inspirations, their hopes and dreams. I loved all of the questions, but I really loved that last question about what brings you joy. I think that was really, really necessary in general, but specifically this week. And again, like, thank you for sharing this evening with us. So I would just like to remind everyone to take part in our feedback, our survey. I will drop the link in the chat again to the Google form. If you fill it out, you're entered into a raffle to win swag from our sponsor, Biovac. We have some more great events coming up this week. Our main event tomorrow is a panel entitled "We Are All Environmentalists, Exploring Different Shades of Green." So that starts at 7 p.m. and runs about until 8:30 again. On Thursday, our main event is going to be a cooking demo with Veggies for Asia. So we're going to be doing a farm to table live cooking event. Yeah, I think. And we definitely had some panelists who mentioned that they enjoy cooking. So I think it would be nice to see you all at that event. And then on Friday, we have a roundtable entitled "Black to the Future, Radically Imagining Liberatory Futures," which, yes, Freweyni. So that's another event that we're really looking forward to. And we hope to see the panelists, some of the audience members. We hope to spend more time with you this week. And thank you again. Good night.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you all.